Two big reveals for the Space Marines today, the Primaris Gladiator Tank and also a new Space Marine Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been covering the news and development for 9th edition as they've been coming out. Today Games Workshop have had their launch party for the Indomitors box, so I thought we'd talk about the Space Marine half of it now, and then talk about the Necrons in their own video. Hopefully I'll get that half out sometime later today. Really some pretty big deals for the Space Marines though. This new mainline battle tank really has quite a lot of options, and also the new Codex has some drastic changes to the Space Marine lineup. Let's talk about the tank first, and then move on to the Codex. So here it is then, the new Primaris Gladiator, very much continuing the trend between the Impulsor and Repulsor. In the little preview video that they had, they basically showed how this thing was fairly similar to a Predator tank in the hull and turret design, and both there and in the Twitch stream, they basically implied that this is going to be a main Space Marine battle tank. There's a lot more of a gun platform rather than a more all-rounder vehicle such as the Repulsor and Repulsor Executioner. I think that we're definitely seeing more analogues of the old Space Marine line in the Primaris Hover version. If a Repulsor is the Primaris version of a Land Raider and the Impulsor is a Primaris version of a Rhino or Razorback, this one will very much be the Predator tank of the Primaris world. It's definitely a niche that felt a bit lacking if you're playing pure Primaris Space Marines. Up to now, if you wanted a vehicle that was a gun platform, then you basically have to shell out for a massive Repulsor Executioner, which very much feels like an all your eggs in one basket approach, and I think it's going to be a bit more practical to have smaller tanks with some slightly lighter defence, while also packing some heavy long-range firepower. Model-wise, for me it seems absolutely fine, very much looks like a Predator with hover tank technology. I know that the Primaris hover tanks do divide opinion a little bit, but basically if you like the Impulsor then I think you'd like this one. I think that having a big main turret makes it a bit more of a focal point compared with say the standard Repulsor, which I think suffers just a little bit from having all sorts of guns poking out from it all over the place. In terms of variants, very much like the Impulsor, you've got quite a lot of different options here. The main turret can pack 3 different weapons, and they have their own special names much like the Predator Annihilator or Predator Destructor had. I think it's quite nice to give them their own little name tags, as it does make them feel just a little bit more unique and distinct from each other, rather than just say a Gladiator tank with this gun on it. The first one is the Gladiator Lancer, which you can see on the right here. This one has a laser destroyer weapon. I believe it looks not too dissimilar from the Repulsor Executioners. It'd be interesting to see its stat line. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't quite as mighty. Or maybe it'll just fire 1d3 shots rather than the 2d3 that the Repulsor Executioner can shoot if it moves slowly. We also have the Gladiator Valiant, which has a twin las talon, which really is going to be putting out a very decent amount of las shots down at the enemy, although the main weakness being that it's going to be at quite short range. Being able to throw out an equivalent of 4 las cannon equivalent shots really isn't bad though, in addition to those sponsons. Finally, we have the Gladiator Reaper, which I believe you should be able to see on screen now, where they said in the explanatory text next to the article that this thing really is packing twin heavy onslaught Gatling cannons, which certainly implies that you're going to be firing out 24 strength 5 AP- shots down range. I think there's honestly very little that's going to be wanting to get in the way of that, though particularly not any infantry. I'm going to be very interested to weigh up the points of these guys when we have them. Being actual dedicated firepower platforms really does give them a bit more chance of having inclusion in more competitive lists. They are going to have to be fairly good to be able to fit in the Marine arsenal though. They're really not short of dedicated vehicle shooting options, whether that's Predators, Vindicators, Whirlwinds, Repulsor Executioners, to name but a few. They should be likely quite mobile though. The Repulsor has a 10-inch move and the Impulsor has a mighty 14-inch move. I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw this as a middle ground at maybe 12 inches, which could be very, very mobile to get those guns exactly where they need to be. Not bad considering the slightly shorter ranges on things like those las talons. Now they're able to move and fire for no penalty whatsoever. They'll be zipping about all over the place, firing at full ballistic skill. Very nasty. In terms of sponson options, it looks like we've got 3 different ones. They haven't 100% confirmed exactly what it's armed with, but to me it looked like there were an option for multi-melters, single storm bolters, and also these interesting Tempest bolters that you can see on this one. It looks like that's a 4-barreled bolt gun. It's interesting that we've got the Storm Bolter, which is essentially a 2-barreled bolt gun, and the Hurricane Bolter that's a 6-barreled bolt gun. I guess that these ones are just a little bit more stormy than a storm, but not quite Hurricane strength yet. I suspect it will just be 4 regular bolt shots, but who knows, we could be looking at something with bolt rifle profiles or something. Finally, one of their pictures revealed that you can give it a pintle-mounted heavy stubber as well. You could really get quite a lot of shots out of this thing if you use the heavy stubber plus the Tempest bolters, which I'm going to assume are rapid-fire 4 weapons, and you also use those heavy onslaught Gatling cannons. It looks like you could be getting 43 shots out of one of these tanks. It really looks like Space Marines are going to be getting an anti-horde weapon just as strong as the Imperial Guards, Leman Russ with Punisher Gatling cannon. Obviously, we'll have to wait for the points to see exactly how much this is going to cost, and also the dreaded price that Games Workshop is going to charge for it. Just having a look at its profile, I'd expect somewhere around 150 to 250 points, depending on just how good they want to make it, and probably exactly what you load it out with. Price-wise, I certainly don't think that this is going to be any less than the Impulsor. The Impulsor will cost you £45 or $75 so I think that it's going to cost the same amount or perhaps slightly more, seeing as it is more of a main battle tank rather than a light transport. And Games Workshop does generally tend to charge a bit more of a premium for anything that's got more guns on it or costs a few more points in game. In any case, I'll certainly be very interested as to just how many points it costs and exactly what it can do, and maybe if it gains any other special rules as the Primaris units often do. Moving on, as anticipated, we've got a new Codex for Space Marines coming out. I think it was kind of inevitable with all of these new releases for them. They are going to have quite a lot more units to cram into the book. It is a bit of a shame that it's going to be fairly soon following the last Codex. It's literally around about 1 year ago now that last book came out, so it hasn't had the biggest shelf life in the world, I'll be honest. They said that this one and the new Necron Codex will be coming in October, which to be honest is still quite a decent amount of time to be waiting. I guess maybe this is partly due to the disruption caused by the virus. I think most of the time for previous editions, Games Workshop usually like to have a codex or two available within the next week, so having a month's delay between the main 9th rulebook release and this is a bit of a long time, to be honest. I know appearances are subjective, but to be honest I'm not the biggest fan of the artwork for this one. I generally preferred the more gritty and realistic looking ones that they had coming out towards the start of 8th edition, and for me the illustrated style just looks a little bit washed out. That is just my personal opinion, of course, though I'm sure loads of people will really like it. Probably the single biggest development that they mentioned on the Twitch stream for this are that this is going to be a unifying codex for the other types of Space Marines. That means that Death Watch, Blood Angels, Space Wolves and Dark Angels will all be using this as a core book, and it is looking like they might be going to a bit more of a system similar to the chapter supplements as they have for the other codexes from the main Codex Space Marines. This really is quite a massive development. These guys have all had their own codexes from Space Marines for editions now, and it has positives and negatives. They generally get quite a lot of attention when they're looked at, but it does mean that they can trail behind the Space Marine rules for quite a few months. Rules-wise, at least this will mean that they gain access to all of the new toys in good time, and it might even be an opportunity for some of the chapters to gain access to options they didn't previously have. Maybe things like Dark Angels or Blood Angels getting access to Centurions, for example, which I always thought was a little bit arbitrary that they didn't get them in the first place. I think we'll have a bit more of an in-depth discussion about exactly what this might mean for the factions at a later date, but I am curious as to how they're going to make things work in the short term and in the long term. I would guess that if they're all going to be based off this main book, then they'd get their own individual chapter supplements, such as say Salamanders and Imperial Fists did, where they have all of their own unique stratagems, warlord traits, individual special characters, and all that kind of stuff. I guess it saves them quite a bit of hassle with just reprinting all of the Space Marine datasheets over and over again, say reprinting the Intercessors datasheet and all of the different supplement books, and they could just reserve the supplement books for the chapter's own special units, such as Blood Angels, Dreadnoughts or things. It'll be interesting to see how fast these are released though. It might mean that we have to wait for some FAQs in the meantime until they actually get supplements for the different chapters released, or maybe just using the datasheets that aren't found in this book from the original codex that they had in 8th. I'm honestly really quite interested to see how Death Watch interact with this whole thing. Death Watch have very little access to the majority of the Space Marine units at the moment. They only have access to some really core choices, with most things being left out of their reach. I imagine that they'll get some sort of unit list where they can pick from some of these, say, Dreadnoughts and Veteran units from this book, but it really is a prime opportunity to give them access to other things, such as the Impulsor or the Phobos Armoured Marines, for example, which they haven't had access to throughout all of 8th. In any case, I think it's going to be quite nice to have the vast majority of your rules all in one book. This really can be a core tome for all things Space Marine. They have stated that the supplements will be able to be used with this book, both the individual chapter ones, such as Ultramarines, White Scars and Salamanders and so forth. At the moment, the ones that are out already are not going anywhere whatsoever, so stratagems, super doctrines and things won't be changing very much for the main core chapters. They also said that Psychic Awakening books will be fully usable with this. I'll be interested to see whether or not they include those Masters of the Chapter from Faith and Fury in with the book. And to be honest, I kind of hope that they do. It would be good to not have to have that book to access those rules in some sort of official setting. Finally, they also mentioned that they will have a Crusade section of the book, which we did already know about, and in the brief preview that we got of the book via the video, it looks like they actually gave us quite a good look at most of the Crusade section, so I'm sure we can go and have a look at that at a later date. One thing that they have mentioned a few times before already is that you can have the option to change a character into a Dreadnought through the course of the Crusade if they get horribly injured or something. Sounds very fluffy, and I'll certainly be interested to see the sort of options they give for factions when they do expand them with their own individual Crusade mode. In any case, a very exciting time to be collecting Space Marines now. Brand new mainline battle tank, in addition to all of the new goodies that they're getting in Indomitus. A new Codex, where they seem to be getting some new options, and certainly shaking things up for the other non-core Codex chapters. I think there'll be a lot of people very keen to get their hands on both this new model and the new book. If there's any details I missed, then please let me know down in the comments below. I certainly want to do a bit more of an in-depth discussion about the implication of these core chapters going into one book, so if you spot anything then let me know. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly be keeping the analysis of 9th edition stuff coming each day, hopefully with the Necrons to come in a few hours' time. If you have been enjoying my content, I'd just like to mention that the channel does have a Patreon page, which is how I can afford to spend quite so much time making videos about model soldiers. If you have been enjoying regularly, then any support is greatly appreciated, and the link is down in the video description below. Channel patrons get to see a new video early before anyone else each week, they get to vote in regular polls to see what comes next on the channel, and they're also entered into my regular prize draws, where I give out big kits of miniatures at the start of each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.